Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live here with me or you are watching the recording, I just appreciate you watching. Thanks for watching. So today we're moving on to a new concept, right? We do these live streams a week ahead. Or I should say a module ahead probably would be the better way of putting it, because, you know, module... What are we in? Module 2? Module 3? One of those modules? I think it's module 3. Ends today. And module 4 starts tomorrow. And module 4 has us looking at something that's just a little bit different, because we have done some stuff with components now, right? And we've done some stuff with, you know, interaction and working with events and doing these sorts of things, right? Basically all the standard stuff that we typically do with, writing, doing front-end development just in general, right? And so now we're moving on to the concept of React, and specifically React Router, which is looking at the process of navigation and how we can build a navigation for our sites. And so it is a little bit different, right? It's a little bit different than what we've worked with in the past. And since it, basically everything we've done so far has been just a little bit different than things that we've done in the past when it comes to React versus things that we've done in the past with JavaScript and things of that nature. And one of the things that I find really interesting about some of the React navigation processes is really this fact that I have the option of using something called Router that handles my routes for me. And when it loads up a web page, right, it loads it up basically on the same page that you're on, right? So for example, if I look at a website like Cleveland CC, right? If we look up here in our URL bar, if I go to some subpage like academics, explore programs of study, we see that we're now on clevelandcc.edu/programs. And that means that in our folder on our server, in this case our content management system, WordPress, has created a folder. It's put an index file in that folder. And so when we navigate to this particular page, we're actually navigating to a different file in a different folder. And in React, we actually don't have to do that. We don't have to have different HTML documents for every single page. We can take our application and we can load it in different pieces, and we can load it on the same page. And we can do it all from within one file, or we can do it more traditionally using multiple files. And so where we're going to start at for this video, for this week, is to just kind of get the lay of the land when it comes to how Router works. And we can just make a little simple navigation that'll take us back and forth between a few different pages here. Right? So it's pretty cool, in my opinion. I guess maybe in other people's opinions as well, but let's go ahead and change directory over to where we need to be. And let's go ahead and start our project. Right, so this will be npx create -react -app. And this will be router test. We'll just call it router test, all lowercase. Router test. And we'll take a few minutes here and we'll just let it do its thing and bring in all the files. And you can see here, though, like if we pay a little bit of attention, it shows us what we're installing. And that takes us into the future just a little bit, right? Because when we're working with React Router, React Router doesn't come bundled with our regular packages that are being installed for React in our project. Right? We see there that it's installing React, it's installing React DOM, and it's installing React scripts, right? But what it's not doing is it's not installing React Router. So one of the things that we'll need to do after we get our project up and running here is we'll need to run a npm script here that will allow us to install React Router to our project. And React Router, the base React Router package that we'll be installing, installs all the core functionality for React Router DOM. So it's going to have code in it that manipulates how things interact with the virtual DOM, right? Which we'll see like when we're navigating from page to page, what exactly that means, because it's loading things into our page without actually going to a different page, which is pretty interesting. And it also installs React Router Native, which is for the React Native project. Right, so that is React Native is something that we'll talk about a little bit when we get into some of the more advanced, the advanced React topics module. React Native allows us to build pages that we can in turn compile to mobile applications. Mobile applications for iOS, for Android. Right, and that's one of the big things that I've kind of tried to push on, is this idea that I want to basically, move this way toward React Native so that you learn React. Then, we kind of touch on React Native just a little bit, but then, maybe in the future we'll do more React Native, or you can go out and expand on that and do some React Native on your own. And so if you're interested in mobile app development, that's something that can push you in that directive instead of doing something like Swift, which is a good programming language, but it limits you to, basically working with iOS apps, right? So if we have React Native, then we have it all, basically. We can make iOS apps, we can make Android apps, we can make standard, desktop web apps, progressive web applications, all from one code, which is cool, right? Which is what we want. So let's cd into our router test folder. And let's open that folder in VS Code. So that's code-r dot. And so from here, I can open up my terminal again. I am going to put my .env file here so I can turn off ESLint. Again, that's not something that everybody would have to do. That might just be for you, right? Like we've discussed this in the past couple of live classes. If you're having issues with ESLint kind of messing with your code compiling, you can use this environment file to stop that from happening, basically. So let me just find that little script in my notes here just to make sure I have the right one. And we will paste that in there. And we will save that. Right, so now I should be able to start my server, start my application by running npm start. And it'll compile my base site, start my server. And give me the same standard boilerplate site that we're accustomed to seeing now whenever we are starting to build a new project, right? We always see our little spinning React logo, right? That's why I put it in the little header in the course. I wanted to have that spinning React logo in there, because we always see this same page. And up until this point, we've always been working on this same page. All right, so let's pop into our source folder, pop into our app.js folder. And we want to pay attention to stuff like this. Export default app. Because that's something that's going to become important to us today. But basically, I'm going to show you two different ways. I'm going to show you one way from inside of our app.js file that we can create a function that will appear as another page in our program. And I'm going to show you a way that we can use another JavaScript file to do the similar sorts of things. Right, so the first thing I need to do, and I guess, probably the first thing I want to do here is just clean this up a little bit. So let's delete everything out of here, right? This is just going to be one of our standard proof of concept sites like we're kind of used to doing. Maybe we'll take it a little bit further today based on how much time we have. And we'll go ahead and save this. And that will, of course, just give us a blank page after we have that saved, because we don't have anything going to the output now. But I do need to stop my server quickly. So I'm going to Control-C and Y to terminate the batch job. and because I need to install React Router to this project. So what I'm going to run is just npm install react-router. And now it's going to install this React Router plugin to my site. Right? We can see that it did the thing. So now we can npm start again to start our server back up. Starting the development server, here it comes. And there it is. Still just a blank page, right? Nothing in particular has changed here. Right? Because we didn't, it didn't impact the page, right? Our React Router doesn't do anything in particular to the pages that we're working on. It only impacts some back-end stuff to help us with the routing for our different pages. And so we can kind of think about what we have in our app.js here in general as being sort of a template. Right? So we're kind of being, so this default function for our app.js is going to basically be our template for our website. So if I want to have a header, if I want to have a footer, if I want to do whatever here, this is where I'm going to kind of be building my template, because it's where ultimately my routing is going to happen. And so we can work with a lot of stuff within this app function here to make things happen. So I've installed React Router to my project, but it has not yet been imported into this project, right? We can't just go out and use it by default. We have to actually install it into the project. And so I told you that when I install React Native like that, or when I install React Router like that, I should say, that it's actually installing two things, right? It's installing React Router DOM, and it's installing React Router Native. And so we don't need React Router Native yet, since we're not using React Native code here. We're just using regular old React. So we need to import the parts that we need from React Router DOM in order to be able to work with this. So I'm going to import, and in curly braces, just so I can kind of break them up onto multiple lines, I'm going to import browser router. And just because browser router is kind of long, I'm going to give that an alias. So browser router as router. I'm also going to import routes, route, and link. So at the end of the day, what I will have that I will be able to reference is browser router, which I'm calling router, routes, route, and link. And again, this is something that, if you were to go online and you were to look up the documentation for React Router, which is, something that I'm encouraging in this course, is to, do a lot of external research and do a lot of, work with, reading documentation and trying to figure things out on your own. The documentation for React Router is on GitHub here, as many things are, right? You can look through, and there's a tutorial here, and gives you documentation, the documentation link here, which takes you here that you can kind of look through. So I would recommend, getting engaged and involved with this stuff, because it does help, right? For our purposes today, I'm trying to, do something that, is a lot simpler, that kind of simplifies it a little bit more than that does. So maybe you can use a base and then go from there. But we're importing all of that from React-router-DOM. And so now we see it's grayed out because we have this import that is declared, but it is unused. And so as we start to use them, we'll see different things here. Now, down here in my return function, I'm going to get rid of this div that we have here by default. And I'm going to start out by making reference to a router tag, capital R in router. And once I do that, you see that's my browser router that we have. And as I implemented that, we saw like my import statement there light up like the 4th of July. Because I was now using that library from React Router DOM. And so if I didn't have as router here, I could still do it. I could still do this as browser router and browser router, right? Remember that as is what creates an alias for it, right? So, I mean, for all intents and purposes, I could say, oh, as B or as R. And I could just make this R and this R. And since it's referencing the alias that belongs to browser router, it knows it's the exact same thing, right? But just for clarity, which is always what we want as we're programming professionally, I like to have the name be router. Because at least then, if somebody comes behind you, they'll know kind of what you did without having to go scrolling through the code. And so this is a container that's going to hold the navigation that we're going to be utilizing with router. So like you can kind of think about it like, when we've worked with PHP in the past, and I've done this stuff with PHP where you have the opening PHP tag and the closing PHP tag, and the existence of these PHP tags lets my browser know, or lets my server rather know, because PHP is a back-end language, lets my server know that the stuff that's within this block is PHP and it needs to be interpreted. I mean, that's basically the same thing that's going on right here, right? By having these router tags, that's just letting my computer know that anything that I put inside of these router tags utilizes router. And as such, it knows what to do with it with the React Router plugin. Right? And so we have to have two sets of things for router. Right? We have to have the link itself, and we have to have a path to that link. Now, we could do all of this if we wanted to in some sort of navigation. So if I wanted to create a constant here for navigation, I could do that. So, and we could just kind of build this in here instead, right? Which I would probably recommend, right? Is having another component for your navigation. So then when it comes time for you to work with this, all you have to really do is reference your navigation component. That way you can kind of keep your app, your default app here that's going to your index.js page relatively clean. Right, so I'm going to put some links in here. Now, the links that we're going to use are going to be different than we're used to making them, right? Because on a regular HTML website, we're used to making anchor tags. We are not making anchor tags here. React Router gives us a special component called link. Right, so I can create links using that special container. And we can go from there. So what I'm going to add here is I'm going to add, I can add a header, right? I could add a header here, and inside of this header, I could just add a few links. So since, judging based on what we imported here, it's uppercase L in link. So that's L-I-N-K link. And we have to tell it where the link is going to. So to equals the location of the link. And so this path is just going to be our default path. So it's just going to be /. This is going to be our homepage button. Right, so we're going to go ahead and finish that opening link tag. It'll write us a closing link tag for us. And we'll just add home right in there like that. And if we save, we actually get an error. Might actually, this one might want me to do, nope. That was right. Did it not? Let me check my modules here. It might not have installed the right module there that we need to work with. And as we've discussed previously, like this is one of the most annoying things about React in general is that it has all of these files that it uses. So we got React DOM, we got React Router. Oh, I think I know what I did or perhaps didn't do here. Because we got React Router here. Let me just, we'll stop our server for just a minute here. Control C to stop our server. We'll hit a Y. there, right? And we will fix our issue, right? I like to leave, I'm leaving it all in just because I think it's important for us to kind of understand how to fix our issues when we are up against something like that. Just everybody makes errors and such. And so we do actually need to install special, even though it was supposed to install it. I think I left a little bit off of my, I left a little bit off of that generic React router command there because I think that was actually supposed to be. I think I'm supposed to have a little bit more on that. So let's just install React Router DOM specifically. And then this will rectify our problem. Let's npm start this back up. And now we have our web page here. There is a web page, but there is nothing on it. And if we look in our inspect element tool into our console, we notice there's no console information here. What's going on? Like, why is there nothing on our page? We have this link here, but we haven't told it where this link is going, which seems kind of important. Right, so we actually have to provide a route to get to this link. Because based on what we have here, all that my program knows is that there's a link. Doesn't know where it goes to, and so it's not going to display it until we've defined a route for it. So in order to do that, we are going to use routes, which is another one of the things that we brought in there. So I'm still inside of my router tags, but I'm going down beneath my header there. And I'm going to add some routes. Let's add a routes tag in here, uppercase R in routes. And this is something that you might want to add another alias for, just so you can more simply sort of tell the difference between routes and route. My routes tag contains multiple route tags. So I am going to add a route inside of my routes for the path of slash, right, which is what we're using here in the link, right? It knows it's going to there, but it doesn't know how it gets there, right? And we will add an element into here, which is going to be some kind of component. Right now, we don't know what that component is. So for the time being, let's just say this might not work. Let's just try navigation. I do have to put it in curly braces here because it's navigation. And then we're going to close that out. So now when we save that, we see that it has saved successfully. Just a moment here. Let me check something really quick here because I might have led you guys astray on something here. I sure did. Yep, because this isn't something that I do a whole lot. So sometimes I have to kind of remind myself of what's going on and remember that I need to actually, that I can't actually put that in another component. I have to put it in the app, the main one that's being exported. And when we do that, we see our home link come up on the screen. Right? We can still use this navigation one, but now it doesn't make sense to call it navigation. I was even saying up front, the app function is going to be like your template here. Right, so let's call it homepage now. We'll go uppercase H in homepage so it matches the rest of our items, and we'll route the path to our homepage element, or our homepage component here. And in our homepage component, let's return H1, welcome to our website. Now, even though we haven't put our homepage component down here otherwise, if we look at our page, it's still on our page. And that's because the default route for our page, the default route for index, adds in homepage. So if we have information that we want on our homepage, we can put it in our homepage component. Let's add another link here. Let's add a link, and we'll just put it in the header section. We'll do /about. And we will put this as about us. Now we're going to register a path here in our routes. So we'll add another route for a path. And we can put this path to be basically whatever we want it to be. So I'm going to make it /about. And the element is going to be an element that we haven't created yet called about. Let me make sure I put it in my greater than, less than. And so I can add this in here as another function, as another component in this same page, right? So without going to anywhere else, I can just copy and paste that, change this to about. Here is information about us. And save. We see it's exported successfully. If we look at our site here, you know, it looks a little janky right now, but we can fix that with CSS, right? And if I click About Us, it changes. And look at what it did to the URL here. It actually added a /about, right? So it knows the path to get to this file, but it's not a different file. It's in the same file, right? Which is different from our static sites and our static site generators. I put this about component right here. I registered a different path to it that shows it being in a different in a different file location, but it's in the same file as everything else that we're working on here. And I can switch back and forth between these two elements. Easy peasy. And so you can do that with basically anything, right? And just whatever I want to put on inside of these components, just like we've been working with components over the last couple of weeks, I can put anything in there that I want. Now, it might make more sense to you to do this stuff on different pages, because then you could also kind of do with kind of the way that we've been working with it, and you can add multiple components to one situation, export that from the main component, and then import the link to it. So let's do that here. I'm going to create we're going to create another link. But before I create that link, I'm going to click on my source folder here to make sure I'm in my source folder. I'm going to click the plus button to create a new file. And I'm going to add a contact.js. And so this is going to be my contact file. And so especially when you get into like bigger projects where you're doing more and more things, you might want to break your components out into different pages like this. So this is another good way that we can kind of look at this and give ourselves an understanding of what's going on here. So all I really need to start doing here is writing my function. Const contact form equals this. And let's just return just a simple form here. So we'll put a div so it has a unified parent component. We'll do input type equals text. Class name equals inp. We'll have a text area. Class name equals text box. We can even give this div a class name of form. Text area, text box. And let's just put a button here for submit. Right? And if we wanted to, like we could do other stuff here with other functions, the way we've done previously. We can make things work with this. We can do conditional CSS. We can do all the kind of fun stuff that we were doing, for example, over the last couple of weeks. But just for this proof of concept here, I'm just going to leave this form as it is, and I'm going to save it. Now, one of the problems is that just like this, I can't import it into any other files. Right? Remember I said to take note of this. We need to do that in this folder with the component that we are exporting. So we will say export default contact form. So now when we import it into our app.js file, it will know what we want to import. We can only do that with one component from a particular file. So if you want to have multiple components in one file and have them all imported as one, you'll just put the calls to the components inside of the return of the default export. All right, so now back in app.js, I can basically follow this sort of import statement here, where I can say I want to import contact form from contact. And so now that's imported. I can link to /contact, and we make this a contact page. And then we can just register the route. So route path equals /contact element equals contact form. Right, it knows what I'm talking about because I imported it. Where did I put this app at? Close that up, save that. I know I forgot to add a file extension here on .contact. That should be contact.js, right? I just let it do it for me. Actually, it's not in. Did I typo? Something. It's giving me this error here, just to let everybody see. Export default imported as contact form was not found in .contact.js. It says module has no export, but it clearly does. Let's try the other method of exporting, which would be export default function and just regular function notation. If it doesn't like it that way, we'll try it the other way. And that it likes. So export default function, write your function. Again, you know, that's the other way of exporting default. It, for whatever reason, didn't like doing it that way in the sub file. Might be something I overlooked. But if we look at our application now, we see we have a home, we have an about us, we have a contact, and if I click on this contact, it pulls up our, you know, what right now is a janky looking form field because we haven't done any CSS on it. Now, if we were to go into app.css, we were to, let's see here, if we look at contact.js, we see we made a class name form. So if we came in here and we made a dot form and we set that to a width of, let's say, 40%. We did a margin, 0 auto, and we saved that. And then we took all of the elements in the form field there. So that was an input. I mean, we could do it this way: an input, a text area. We made classes for them, but we could just do it this way as well. And a button. And do a width of 100%. And do like a padding, do like a margin, 0 auto, do like a padding, bottom of say 12. Let's do like 1.2 rem instead. Oh, I didn't want padding bottom. I wanted margin bottom, didn't I? So let's put 1.2 rem there. Late in the day. And then we can make the padding. You just take that out. Then we get our proof of concept form looking more like this. Right? So we got our home, we got our about us, we got our contact. And one thing to note here, right, is how performant it is. Even though, you know, we are, you know, we have a really simple site here. We can see that it's really performant. Like it's moving really fast. It's really quick. We can also do some CSS on our nav bar up there to make it look a little bit better. Right, so if we look at our app.js, here on our links, I have a header. I don't think header is referenced anywhere else in here. Yeah, everything else in here is just classes. So I can put a header reference into here. I can make that display grid. Grid, template columns. Can just be, for the sake of time, we'll just do 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. So now it looks like that. I think maybe what's happened here is I need to asterisk box sizing border box. And, oh yeah, that's how late in the day it is. I put commas there. Commas don't go there. Then if we wanted to, right, we could do like some of the other grid stuff. So let's see. I always have to look up the grid command. So let me just look up that right quick. CSS grid. It's okay to look things up if you need to, right? Like that's the whole bit. So what I want to do is I want to justify items. Yeah, I can never remember if it's justify items that justifies the child, because there is a similar one which is justify content, I believe. But justify items is the one that I want. And so I want to justify items, enter. And so when we look at that now, we have our 3 links across the top: home, about us, and contact. You know, we have some stuff that we could make look nicer. Right, we could sit here for another several hours and just play with CSS and stuff like that, but that's not the point of this. The point of this was just to use the router to see how we can do stuff like this. So we basically have our proof of concept here that we can work with for the future. And maybe as you're practicing, of course, like I want you all to, when you're making your assignments, I want you all to make fully completed sites. But, while you're practicing, it's probably a good idea to, fully flesh out these sites and make them what you want them to be, right? Because that's the only way that we're going to get better is if we're actually doing something like that. So, with that being said now, we can go ahead and wrap up. I will get this shipped off to GitHub as we always do when we wrap up. So let's create a new GitHub here. We'll call this R Router 1. And we'll go ahead and copy the repo. I will Control C to stop my server. And we will get init, get add period, get commit -m initial commit. Get remote add origin, which is our that, and then we will get push origin master, and we will send it off on its merry way. So now if we look at our GitHub page here, we should see bloop, 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 there's all our code. Now let's push it to GitHub pages. Which I've got my notes for pushing it to GitHub pages around here somewhere. There they are. So I'm going to npm install gh-pages --save-dev. And it'll install all the background files that I need for pushing this to GitHub pages. We will look at our JSON file here, our package.json. We will add a home page here under version. So we will have a home page that is going to https://username.github.io/rrouter. What did I call it? rrouter-1. We'll also go down to our scripts here and add our pre-deploy and deploy scripts. So let's add a pre-deploy. And that pre-deploy is npm run build. Did I? Yes, I did. And our deploy script, which is going to be gh-pages-d build. Boom. And so now we should be ready to run npm run deploy. So it runs our deployment script and it does the job that it needs to do. npm run deploy. It'll run the build. It'll start working everything together. It'll start compiling a file to do what it needs to do. And it says it is now published. So if we go back to our GitHub page now, we should be able to refresh our page, see that we have 2 branches, see that we have a GH Pages branch, and if we go to our settings, in our Pages tab, we will have a GitHub Pages link here shortly. So we will just give that a second or two just so we can see the live site before we wrap up for today. We've almost gone the full hour, which is good for these. A lot of these are a little bit shorter. But while we're waiting on the GitHub pages here to show up, just next week we'll be still working on covering router. We'll be looking at dynamic routes and things of that nature next week, so we'll just be expanding on what we already know. Here is our router page. We can see home, about us, and contact. And we saw it behaves a little bit weird just by default, right? Because router doesn't work the same. When it's compiled to a GitHub pages as it does in the real world, right? In the real world on a real development server, we saw that, it actually has that welcome by default. This is just a limitation of GitHub pages here. And we actually have to click the home to see the home. And we also see something a little bit weird here is that it is, because it's the way that router works, right? It's actually removing the rest of my URL that's taking me to /rrouter1. Again, on a full-fledged server, it's going to work like normal here. Pushing it to GitHub, it's going to work a little strangely. So just keep that in mind. This is not a perfect solution. It's just because we don't necessarily have a MERN server that we can deploy for all of our projects. Those cost money, and I don't want you to spend money on that. So with that being said, that's where we'll wrap up. We'll take any questions if anybody has them while we are wrapping up here. We can see it still functionally runs, even though it's a bit weird. But that's fine. Again, next week we'll be looking at some more of this stuff. We'll be looking specifically at dynamic routing and other things like that. So that will bring us to the end. Thanks for watching. If you're watching the recording and you have any questions or you think of a question and come back later, then just send me a Teams message or an email or whatever you need to do, and we will work with it. But that's all that we have time for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.